Welcome to another edition of Around with Randall, your weekly podcast on making your nonprofit more effective for your community. And here is your host, the CEO and founder of Hallett Philanthropy, Randall Hallett.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood, as Mr. Rogers would say, on this edition of Around with Randall. We find ourselves with what I, maybe more anecdotally than anything else, experience more interim leadership in our nonprofits. So this could be the CEO, the executive director, the chief philanthropy officer, maybe even a leadership in a larger organization, leadership, major gift position. But it's more prevalent as the tenure of many of these positions continues to diminish. Today, we want to talk about the interim status that comes with this phenomenon, and from two perspectives. What should interim leaders do, but also what should staff members do as they may have an interim leader? And in this, whether you're the one or the other, you learn from each other, hopefully, about some of the expectations and things that are prevalent in these types of scenarios. So as we usually do here at Around with Randall, we'll start from the top, work our way down into the tactical. What we're finding is that, and this is a study by Campbell and Campbell and Company, that 52% of CDOs are only serving now 1 to 2 years, and that 75% of CDOs cite unrealistic expectations for the reasons that there's a lot of turnover. This is what I talk about at the very end of each podcast, the hole between the nonprofit work fills between corporate, for-profit business and government. For-profit doesn't want to do certain things. It doesn't make money. Government's not that efficient. But the needs within the nonprofit whole or sector are growing, and that's putting a lot of pressure on nonprofits. And thus what we find is what we just discussed, that the tenure is dropping. CEOs in healthcare are down to, the head of a hospital is down to 3 years or less. We know that gift officers are somewhere around 18 to 19 months. The turnover rate is prevalent. And some of that is because we hire the wrong people, but also is that the demands of the job are increasing as the needs increase. We need more money. We need more outcomes. We need better interaction with the community. And the path to get there isn't reasonable, it's more immediate. Which brings us to the reason why interims are so possible in today's environment, is that organizations are trying to figure out, well, maybe they made a bad hire, maybe it was a short tenure, maybe they don't know why there's a problem, that an interim provides a gap filler and allows a board, a CEO, an executive team to kind of assess exactly what needs to be done. And as a result, interims come in, and we may ask the question, theoretically or philosophically, what are they supposed to do? Well, what we know is that there are really three distinct roles that are possible. And it's not that one would only be in one of these roles. We could have interims that take up several, or a couple, or maybe just the one. What are these three roles? Well, the first is they're a caretaker. They're there to keep things running, keep the trains moving on time, that we're not making massive change, that we're going to just keep everything moving forward till an organization and or those hiring figure out what it is that they want. The second is a stabilizer, meaning that there's a problem and they're there to fix the friction. They're there to clarify roles and to make adjustments based upon what the entity, which could be the CEO for a CPO, the board for a CEO or executive director, whoever the boss or bosses are asking that interim to do to make sure things are stabilized. Look, we got to just clean up a little bit. That's in contrast to the third, and that's the change agent, that there are some big problems, and this is a reset. And many times these interim leaders are being asked to come in and really change structure, process, personnel, talent, and they have the backing of the leadership, whether that's the board for the CEO, the CPO who would report to the CEO. They have cover. They're told, go figure out what the problems are and take care of them before we bring in someone else. In some ways, they're almost being told, you clean up the problems, you're going to be paid well for it. So when we hire a permanent, they don't have any of those dirty hands based upon the things that need to be done. Depending on exactly which one of the three the interim is will determine kind of the goals and direction that they will go. But at the same time, I think we probably under discuss or don't bring up what an interim does to a staff. And there's some fascinating studies, both out of the nonprofit space, but also out of places like Harvard Business School about, and this is maybe in the for-profit world, but the premise is the same, about what happens to a staff when you have an interim. That things like email and meetings diminish by 20% because people feel as if they can't really make decisions, so why have the meetings? We also know that communication overall tends to diminish internally because people become apprehensive, don't know who to trust, don't know who to talk to, don't know whose side someone's on. People almost become scared, anxiety ridden as to, am I next and who do I believe, and things of that nature. This all means that they become not just workers, but risk adverse, or they're in the risk management business for their own job and their own career or their own section of the nonprofit or whatever it might be. And that this drives less production and efficiency. So we have two positions that we have to consider. Number one is, what is the interim being asked to do? And we talked about that from the caretaker, stabilizer, or change agent, but also what the staff's going through when they don't have permanent leadership and direction. And they're not quite sure what that CPO is interim, CEO, executive director is interim, is trying to do. Which brings us maybe to the last thing before we start moving more into the tactical around what is it that interims can look at in terms of their success. And I look at these in four categories, no matter which one of the three, the caretaker, the stabilizer, the change agent, they possibly could fit into, or maybe two of the three, is kind of looking at it as a kind of a scoreboard. Four things that an interim leader hopefully is aiming for. And number one is that there is confidence at two levels. So this is 1 and 2. The first is confidence externally. That depending on how high up this particular position is and the role in the community, or the role in which the organization, the nonprofit plays in the community, is to bring some stability, some confidence that everything's okay. Doesn't mean there may not be changes. It doesn't mean that there may not be adjustments, but generally everything's okay. The part B of that is the same in many ways with the team. Even the change agent, who may be asked to come in and make personnel changes, structural changes, process changes, there are still good people. I've never seen a situation where an interim comes in and cleans out an entire department and or an entire organization. They may remove or dismiss or ask people to move on, a bunch of people, but they're not just killing everybody out the door, which means that the roles and the priorities internally are important. And so they're going to be judging, hopefully, who are the right people to fit into this. And we'll talk more about this from the tactical pieces of what a staff might think about in terms of what they should do. The third is what I would consider pipeline integrity, or maybe some improvement, is that if we're nonprofits, we're based upon some kind of donor revenue stream. Maybe you have an alternative revenue stream like healthcare has reimbursement rates, education has tuition, but generally donors are part of this, which means we need to make sure that we're continuing a process of bringing in and making the right conversations possible. So this gets into, is the data clean? Do we have the right stages? Are we moving people forward? Are we aligning people to the mission rather than just people? We should never be dependent on a situation where it's the person who makes the gifts possible, but they never really tie themselves to the mission of what the organization is trying to accomplish. So pipeline integrity from a donor perspective, those relationships, is critical. The last is if they're really an interim, and we're going to make that assumption, that this isn't just a test case for 6 months to figure out what this person can do, trial run, so to speak. It's a real interim. They're coming in to make sure things are whatever it might need to be done in terms of that caretaker, stabilizer, or change agent. They're there also to create a handoff readiness for the next leader. And depending on what the role of that interim is, that could mean creating clear job descriptions. That could mean clear metrics. That could mean getting rid of people who may not be really all that inclined to be at the organization. That could be realigning people. Maybe people are in the wrong positions. Whatever that change to process, talent, people, or work to be done, what they're really trying to do is they want to walk out the door and a new person comes in the door with as much possibility as can be feasibly built. And so this allows the organization not to stabilize, but to elevate based upon what an interim might be able to do to calm things down or settle things down or work things out in a reasonable way. This moves us into our tactical. What is it that we really should be thinking about? And I want to break this into two pieces. The first is, what should an interim do if you're the interim? You come in and what am I supposed to do here? Number two, which we'll get to in about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, is your staff member. What should you do if you have an interim come in and you're now reporting to an interim? Your supervisor, boss, manager's no longer there. We'll cover both. So let's start on the tactical on being the interim. The first thing is you have to start day one with the conversation with the CEO and board to find out which one of the three they really want. And you should have probably done that before you took the job. Some people aren't built to be change agents. They're just not. They're going to keep the status quo. Some people probably are too much change agents. And if the organization just wants a caretaker with a little bit of adjustment, maybe a little bit of stabilization, they come in and they want to catapult the organization or department forward much more so than the CEO wants for a department, the board wants for the organization as a whole. So the first thing is the interim starting the conversation probably pre-day one around what's inbounds and what's out of bounds. Can they do organizational change? Can they do comp change? Can they do campaign decisions? If it's philanthropy, what decisions are really not going to be allowed to be made, but need to be made down the road by maybe a more permanent replacement? 3, what needs to be stabilized immediately? Where are the pressure points? Are they key donors? Are they board expectations? Are they team conflicts? Are they revenue problems? Are they financial problems? A great interim leader can very quickly, and probably with a lot of insight from a board or the CEO, if it's a department, can be told, look, I think these 2 problems or 3 problems or 1 problem exists. Start there. My advice is that's where you should start. Now, that doesn't mean you don't find other things, but your real role, even if you're a change agent, is to begin with stabilization. And to stabilize, you have to figure out where the problems are. To figure out where the problems are, you have to, we'll get into this, have a lot of conversations and do a lot of listening. The other thing that probably is, I think, completely under-discussed, most time not discussed at all, is defining with the board, if you're the CEO, an interim CPO or CDO or department leader, with the CEO or their boss, asking the question, what does success look like when I'm done? And then even more so, breaking that down into thirds. What does the success look like in the first third of this tenure? What does the success look like in the second third of this tenure? And what does this success look like in the third part of this tenure? The reason these are important is a good interim leader, if they know what the first third metrics, goals, successes look like, they know what things need to be stabilized right away. And they know which things they can say, look, everything's fine over there. We might make some adjustments, but we're not going to worry about that now. And then they can begin to communicate that out. All too often, we put an interim in and say, go fix the problems or go stabilize or whatever. But there's no conversation about what anybody above them thinks that, above the interim, thinks that might look like. Well, what kind of leadership can you provide if you don't know what direction you're supposed to go? And so these kind of benchmarks, first, third, second, third, are going to allow an interim leader to figure out, hey, here's what I might be focusing on. So the first things, as I talked about, what are inbounds, out of bounds, what's going to be left for maybe a more permanent long-term solution? What things need to be stabilized immediately? What are the goals in kind of increments of thirds within timeframes or months, year, whatever it might look like? So that's the first. The second is the critical first 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, possibly a month, depending on the size of the organization, to do two things: communicate out and listen in. The first is communicating out. How will you create a communication cadence? How are you going to communicate internally with the team? Weekly, daily, staff meetings, emails, videos. There's lots of different options. But as we'll get into in a moment, staffs get nervous with an interim. The more open communication there is, honest dialogue, the better off it's going to be. This is also true with the outside world. How do you communicate regularly with donors, with key constituents, with the board, with advocates, with volunteers? One of the keys here is being able to set a clear line of understanding about what your role is and the fact that the organization's just fine, that we're going to continue to do great work, and that an interim is just there to help guide in the interim the same mission, maybe executed a little differently, but the same intent that it always has. So communicate out. The second is listening in. The best interim people I've ever seen do a series of one-on-one listening sessions. Maybe it's small group. And they ask questions like, what's working? What's stuck? What do you need from me? The biggest question. What do you need from me? How do I help you? What hurdles are in front of you? So that you get an opportunity to figure out, hey, part of my interim status, no matter which one of the three, caretaker, stabilizer, or change agent, these are data points based on opinion. But if you start hearing the same opinion over and over and over, and it makes practical sense, that elevates it to becoming a more immediate stabilization issue. These listening tours are key. And so being able to sit down, have a cup of coffee, don't make them formal, doesn't mean, you're laid back in a lounge chair. They're professional, but they're not meant to be overly burdensome to the staff member or team. So listening in, communicating out. Number 3 is triage donors. We live in a world, as we've talked about, that 95% of the dollars come from 5% of the people. You got to find out who those 5% are and go out and talk to them. Top 25 relationships, top 50 relationships, any at risk, anybody who's feels like they've been left out of. And this happens with donors. They're not on the board. I'm a major donor. No one told me that so-and-so was leaving, and they're not quite sure why. We can't talk about it. Getting out in front of these people and giving them confidence. The organization's in good shape. The team's in good shape. We're moving forward in a positive way. We need you to be a part of that because you have made it possible for us to be who we are to this point. And we see you being an incredibly important part of what our future is. Donor kind of triage. The last is the process around future donors. Sometimes interim leaders come in and focus so much, and we mentioned this a few moments ago, around the current major 25 or 50 or whatever top 5% or 3%. But we fail to look at the pipeline. And what I find is sometimes then all pipeline activity stops. What we know is if pipeline activity stops in the short term, it has a long-term implication on new donors coming in, on larger donors being found, new relationships being discussed. And so we need to ensure that we keep that hygiene of the pipeline clean, that it needs to move forward. Are we doing our stages, next steps? Are we out seeing people? The third large piece of this is breaking it into the thirds that I mentioned earlier in terms of goals. What's the goal in the first third, second third, and third third? So if we take 90 days as a good or bad example, the first 30 days, maybe you're going to be there 170 days. So it's the first 90 days is all about clarity of what decisions you can make, the listening tours, and the idea of what can't we allow to fail? What do we need to fix immediately? If it's finance, it's something over there. We got to worry about that. If it's whatever it might be. This is about stabilizing what you currently have. Even if you're a change agent, stabilizing in the first third is critical. The second 30 days becomes about, or in our 90-day example, but the second third becomes about improvement. What limited number of improvements can we offer to make the organization function more effectively? And this is where you get maybe a staff change or a process change. But the idea is you're not going to change everything at once. These are limited opportunities to make the process better. Third is in that last third. So in our 90-day example, the last 30 days, 170 days, interim status is going to be the last 90 days, is about building into the handoff. Writing up some kind of, I call it my leaving memo of where are we at, what have we done, what are the challenges, what are the strengths from the interim's perspective, to be handed off eventually to a permanent replacement. And then preparing for that leader to come in and hit the ground running. All these things you may think, well, gosh, that seems kind of common sense. Too often I don't see them in writing. Like, hey, here's what we're going to accomplish. Put them in writing, goals. Because we think, well, the interim will figure it out. We just got to keep everything afloat. No, the interim's there to fix an issue. There's a reason there's an interim. Whatever it is. How do we do these steps? Because it's about behavioral outcomes that we're looking at for that interim. We want them to be transparent in what they're doing. Lots of communication. There are going to be a couple things they can't talk about, and that's also okay. But transparent is important. Uncertainty is detrimental when all things are hidden. When nobody knows what's going on, everybody gets scared. So we need to realize that these behavioral roles of communication, we don't want there to look at like this as an audition. If it's a true interim status, their job is to come in, fix, stabilize, whatever, and move on. And if they're auditioning, that may mean they try to do more or less than actually needs to be done. And we need to avoid major change culture rewrites, so to speak. The interim's job is not to reformat the organization with a new mission. Even if they're a change agent, the mission stays the same. So this brings us to this kind of conclusion of the interim perspective. But what's not discussed is the second part, which I promised in the last part of our tactical, is what the staff goes through. This is hard on staffs because they don't have a clarity of where they are going. Even with a bad leader, there is clarity most of the time. They may not like the direction, but they know where it's going. All of a sudden, there's an interim, and nobody's quite sure what to do. And so there are 4 things I think a staff member should do if they have an interim boss, supervisor, manager, leader. The first is that they can't assume the interim can read their mind, know what they do. Well, they've been in the profession forever. They understand. No. You have no idea as a staff member what an interim is dealing with politically or from a financial perspective or from a board perspective or the politics. And so if you assume they understand, then you're leaving a lot to chance, which means there are probably 4 things you need to think about to make sure your interim supervisor, boss, manager, whatever, knows what you do. Number 1 is, what are your goals? What was being asked of you? And then kind of 1A, where are you at against those goals? Number 2 is, what are the top opportunities in front of you? So if this is about a fundraiser, what are your biggest portfolio opportunities? Where are you at in the kind of the active portfolio management process? If you're in infrastructure, here's what we do from a process perspective. If you're in finance, here's our protocols and audits and procedures that we go through. Whatever it is you do, creating a 1-page, 2-page sheet about what the position not only is today, which is really what the goals are all about, but what opportunities lay in front of you that, or for the organization, that could be taken advantage of regardless who the leader is. 3, what are the risks? What are the things that might cause you, the staff member, your job performance, a challenge? Now, if you make a list of 50, then you look like you're the problem. What are the 2 or 3 things that if we could find solutions that you'd like to be a part of finding could allow us to be successful, allow me to be successful, allow the organization to flourish? Interim leaders love finding easy solutions to simple problems. And sometimes it's our responsibility not just to complain about the problem, but to bring the solution forward, or at least an option. The fourth is, what do you need in this moment during this interim process? Do you need a lot of assistance? Did you get a lot of assistance? Did you get none, but you needed it? Or are you pretty much an independent person? And here's how you can measure my activity. You want to create a one-page, what I would think of as an operating dashboard about your goals, about the opportunities, about the risks, and what you need. Maybe it's front and back. To be able to sit down in that hopeful one-on-one conversation, say, I want to give you an idea of where I'm at, what's expected, what I'm doing, where I see we could go, and what things could be really important to me and for the organization to be successful. All too often, I see team members not do that, and interim leaders are trying to figure out too much. They're absorbing too much information. And something like this goes, wow, this person's organized. Wow, this person knows what they're doing. Wow, I may not understand all of it, but at least there's a plan. Put that plan in a simple document that you can present. Number two, when you have these conversations, don't inflate positive things that don't exist. I'm also not saying don't be a negative Nelly. Be honest. Accuracy beats optimism or negativity. You're overly optimistic, the interim leader, if they have any brains, is going to say, something's not right. If you're overly negative, they will quickly say, well, you're a problem. Complaining. Which brings us to, how do you be accurate? What is it that the organization and your role in the organization is working? What's not? And this is about using maybe some language like, hey, we're pretty close on this, or hey, the next action is maybe to think about this, or a decision was kind of being discussed in this area. I need help with this in this particular endeavor. That honesty will build credibility for you with the interim leader, which may be transitioned off to other people down the road as well. C, or third, however you want to look at it, is to protect yourself and your donors, which means you need to be open and honest with them. You may have to move to a little bit of stewardship if there's some indecision with donors, particularly those close to an ask who were tied to maybe another leader that isn't there anymore. How do we steward our donors in a way that allows them to know their importance for the organization? Because that isn't dependent on any one person. The second thing it does is it shows that you're getting out and seeing people. Now, if you're in finance, how do you keep the process moving? If you're in infrastructure, so data, here's the process. We need to keep communicating. All these things are critically important to protect yourself, the donors, your staff, the organization. We don't become stagnant. The last is what I just call a professional posture. You need to show up a little early. You need to stay a little late. You need to make sure your notes are clean. You need to close loops. You need to make sure there's not, things that aren't done that no one knows what to do. You need to look and be organized. And I know this sounds strange, but if your desk is a dumpster fire, first impressions matter. And an interim walks in and goes, oh, Lord, look at this place. You have to realize that an interim is going to make quick assessments. And it may not be totally accurate. It may not be totally right. But you can help yourself by being organized, from showing up early, showing up to meetings early, staying late, being seen, doing the good work, presenting your information, being succinct, and taking care of yourself, your office, and the environment around you. Be a catalyst for positive rather than a catalyst for negative. And in that process, what you'll find is that you'll gain some credibility, maybe an opportunity to grow, to get more in terms of what you want to do, because they see you as someone who could actually do it. So kind of creating that dashboard about, what's going on, the goals, situation, what we're trying to do. We're trying to be accurate, not too optimistic, not too negative. We're going to protect ourselves, our donors, our teams, about getting the right information to the right people and moving the right things forward about organizational mission and outcome and structure. And finally, we're going to have a professional posture. Show up early, stay late, look like we're organized, look like we're professional. Those may seem simple, but again, I don't see them done. If you do that, and then we have what to do as the interim leader, between the two, you can begin to see, if I'm the staff member, what the interim leader might be doing. I can lean into that. If you're the interim leader and you're looking for things, you could say, look, give me these things. You could be looking for these things in the staff. They're actually cross-connected. That's why I did the episode a little bit longer today together, because they're not isolated. Interim leaders are trying to figure out certain things to move the organization forward. Ironically, staff members are trying to figure things out a little bit smaller scale about themselves, the staff, the department, the organization, to move things forward. And thus, they're interconnected. And interims are going to become something I think that are more regular and that we need to be more ready to deal with. And hopefully today it gives you some tactics and some thoughts about how to do that, both for the interim leader and the staff who might serve that interim leader. Don't forget to check out the blogs at hallettphilanthropy.com. 2 per week, just something to think about, read. You get an RSS feed. I'm really stunned by how many people have done that, to be honest with you. It comes right into your inbox every Tuesday, Thursday. It's something just to think about. And if you'd like to reach out to me, podcast at hallettphilanthropy.com. I should have mentioned at the top, today's episode came from a listener. Sam down in Texas asked about this because Sam has an interim leader and wanted to know how to deal with it. Send me an email. I love the subjects because what it does gives me an opportunity to do some digging, some research, some educational research to get you the information that you need in these podcasts, my 21st century classroom. Nonprofits are needed. The work you do is needed. It serves a critical mission for not only the organization for which you serve, but for the community in which you live and for the people who live in it. Some people make things happen. Some people watch things happen. Then there are those who wondered what happened. You're someone who makes something happen. Your organization, hopefully somebody is someone or something that's making things happen for the people, the places and things in our community that are wondering what happened. That gap filler between free enterprise and government. What a great way to spend a life and a career making a difference in helping other people. I hope you get a sense of that each and every day. And if you don't, pull back, shut the door, put on the headphones, whatever you got to do, and reflect upon the value you deliver every day to your nonprofit and to the world of philanthropy. I'll look forward to seeing you the next time, right back here on the next edition of Around with Randall. Don't forget, make it a great day.